Have you ever wondered why some people work hard their entire lives yet still struggle with money, while others, who don't seem to work any harder, keep getting richer and more financially free? Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki takes you on a journey to find the answer. This isn't just a book about money, it's about mindset. It's about how the rich think, use, and turn money into a tool, while the poor and middle class let money control their lives. Along the way, you'll hear the story of two fathers, one highly educated, hardworking, yet constantly drowning in debt, and another, less educated, but someone who understood the secrets of money and became wealthy and free. Join me on this journey of discovery, and who knows, this might just be the beginning of the biggest shift in your own financial mindset. And don't forget to hit like and follow the channel so you won't miss more life-changing books on money and personal growth. Chapter 1. The Rich Don't Work for Money. Imagine you're a 9-year-old boy. You see the people around you rushing to work from morning to night, only to complain about not having enough money, not having enough time. You wonder, why is it like this? Is there another way to live? This is the story of Robert Kiyosaki, the author of this book. He had two fathers, one poor, one rich. And from a very young age, he learned an important lesson. The rich don't work for money. When Robert and his best friend Mike were only 9 years old, they became curious about why some people were rich while others were poor. They went to Rich Dad, Mike's father, to learn. But Rich Dad didn't answer them directly. Instead, he gave them a small job at his convenience store, paying them only 10 cents an hour. After a few weeks, Robert grew frustrated. He thought, "This isn't fair. I'm working hard, but the pay is so low. I'm not learning anything at all." So he went to Rich Dad and demanded a raise. Rich Dad just smiled and said, "This is how most people live their entire lives. They work hard, hoping for higher pay. They think that if they make more money, they'll finally be happy. But the truth is, even if their salary increases, they stay stuck in the same cycle. Work, earn, spend, and then need more money all over again." Rich Dad explained, "The poor and middle class work for money. The rich learn to make money work for them." What does that mean? Instead of trading your time and labor for a paycheck, you must learn to invest, to build assets, and to make money a tool that generates more money for you. He added, "If you let the fear of not having money control you, you'll accept any job just to have income. But if you learn to master that fear, you'll start finding ways to break free from dependence on a paycheck." This first lesson was like a wake-up call. It wasn't easy to accept, especially for a child. But Robert realized that escaping the endless cycle required a shift in mindset, and that lesson stayed with him for life. Rich Dad continued, "Most people are driven by two emotions, fear and greed. They fear not having money, so they settle for jobs they don't like, working hard, but never daring to change. And when they do get money, they want more. Greed takes over. They want a bigger house, a nicer car, better things. These two emotions make people slaves to money. They don't realize that the more they chase money, the more they let money control their lives." He advised Robert, "You can't let emotions run your life. Learn to use reason. Learn to observe and learn. When you master your emotions, then you can master money." Rich Dad didn't just teach with words, he used that low-paying job as a real-life test. Robert recalled, "At first I was angry. I thought he was exploiting me. But then I began to observe. Why was he paying so little? Why were the other employees willing to work for years without complaining?" As he reflected, Robert realized they were afraid of change. They chose short-term security over long-term opportunity. They gave up learning and growth for the comfort of a steady paycheck. Rich Dad smiled. "Exactly. When you start observing instead of just reacting, you're learning. That's the difference between the rich and the poor." He emphasized, it's not about how much money you make, it's about how much you keep and how well you make it grow. He pointed out that some people win millions in the lottery, yet within a few years are back to nothing. Meanwhile, others start with very little, but with the right mindset, they build massive wealth and freedom. The takeaway was clear. Mindset matters more than income. The poor and middle class focus only on wages. The rich focus on financial thinking and how money really works. Finally, Rich Dad concluded, if you want to be rich, you must learn to make money work for you. Don't just work for money. Work to learn. Learn to observe, learn to do business, learn to manage your emotions, and learn to build assets. This was the very first lesson, the foundation for everything that would follow in Rich Dad, Poor Dad. As an adult, Robert Kiyosaki applied this philosophy to his life. Instead of following the traditional academic path his poor dad wanted, he focused on building assets and investing. The result? He became one of the world's most renowned investors, entrepreneurs, and authors. Chapter 2. Why teach financial literacy? In the previous chapter, we learned the first lesson. The rich don't work for money. But what allows them to make money work for them? The answer lies in financial education. In school, we're taught how to read, how to write, and how to do math. But almost no one teaches us how to manage money. And that's exactly why, no matter how good someone is academically, many still struggle financially for their entire lives. In this chapter, Rich Dad explains, if you want to be rich, you must learn a kind of knowledge that schools will never teach you. Rich Dad said, many people think that if they get a high-paying job, they'll escape financial trouble. But the reality is, the more they earn, the more they spend. They buy a bigger house, a nicer car, more expensive things. And in the end, they still never have enough. This is what he called the rat race. You work hard, earn money, spend it, then need more money, and the cycle repeats for life. Poor Dad, Robert's biological father, was a perfect example. He was highly educated, respected in society, and had a stable income. But every time his salary increased, his living expenses rose with it. As a result, he was never free from financial pressure. Meanwhile, Rich Dad had a completely different perspective. He said, the difference between the rich and the poor isn't how much they earn, but how they manage their money. The poor and middle class focus on income, their salary. The rich focus on assets, things that generate cash flow, even when they're not working. That's why someone earning less can still end up wealthier over time if they invest in assets, while a high earner who only spends will remain financially stuck. Rich Dad taught Robert and Mike a simple principle, one that separates the rich from the poor. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. For example, a rental property that brings in monthly income is an asset. The house you live in, with mortgage payments, maintenance, and taxes, is actually a liability. The rich focus on building their asset column, things that generate long-term cash flow. The poor and middle class often accumulate liabilities, mistakenly thinking they're assets. This common mistake is why most people never become wealthy. Recall that Poor Dad often advised, study hard so you can get a secure job with a high salary. But Rich Dad said, if you want to be rich, you must learn to read numbers, to understand how money works. Rich Dad explained that financial literacy is a survival skill. You can make a lot of money, but if you don't know how to manage it, it will slip away. He shared that millions of lottery winners end up broke after just a few years.
Why? Because it's not money that makes someone rich. It's knowledge and financial mindset. Rich Dad revealed a harsh truth. Schools teach you how to become a good employee, but they don't teach you how to master money. You might learn how to become a doctor, engineer, or teacher, but almost no one teaches you how to manage income, how to invest, how to build passive cash flow. That's why many highly educated people, even professors and PhDs, still struggle financially. Rich Dad offered a clear picture. Everyone has two columns in their financial life: the asset column and the liability column. The poor and middle class expand their liability column: debt, loans, and rising expenses. The rich focus on growing their asset column: real estate, stocks, bonds, businesses, intellectual property. He said, a person's wealth is not measured by their monthly salary, but by the size of their asset column. Once your assets are big enough, they'll support your life, even if you don't work anymore. Finally, Rich Dad concluded, the most important thing you must learn in life is to know the difference between assets and liabilities. Focus on buying assets. If you do that, you'll become rich. If you only accumulate liabilities, you'll always struggle financially. Robert realized Rich Dad never said you had to make huge amounts of money. Instead, he emphasized financial thinking, something schools never teach. And this became the second big lesson. Financial education is the foundation of wealth and freedom.
Chapter 3. Mind Your Own Business. In the previous chapter, we learned how to distinguish between assets and liabilities, the core foundation of financial education. Now, Rich Dad teaches a new lesson: mind your own business. Most people spend their entire lives working in someone else's business, for a company, for a boss, or for the government. But the rich think differently. They focus on their own business, meaning they focus on building and nurturing their personal asset column. So how can you do the same? Let's find out. Rich Dad explained, there's a common misunderstanding. People think their profession is their business, but it's not. If you're a doctor, then your profession is medicine, but your real business should be your personal finances, where you invest, what you build, and how you create long-term income. The poor and middle class usually concentrate only on developing their careers. They go to school, get jobs, climb the ladder, and earn more money. But because they don't focus on building assets, even after a lifetime of hard work, they remain trapped in the money game. He emphasized, remember, your real job is not your day job. Your real job is to build your asset column. Rich Dad taught Robert and Mike, the rich invest their time, energy, and money into buying assets. Everyone else spends their time buying liabilities, thinking they're getting richer. For example, the middle class often buys a bigger house when they make more money, but that's a liability. It just adds more expenses. The rich buy rental properties, stocks, or start small businesses. These investments create steady cash flow and support them over the long term. Rich Dad concluded, don't chase liabilities just to prove your success to others. Quietly build your assets. That's your true business. Robert noticed that most people, when they earn more, immediately raise their standard of living. They buy a new car, luxury items, or a bigger home. As a result, their monthly expenses rise with their income. Rich Dad called this the spending trap. It makes people feel like they're getting richer, but in reality, they're locking themselves into more debt and more obligations. The rich do the opposite. When their income increases, they don't increase their spending. Instead, they use the difference to buy more assets. This patience and discipline is what creates a massive difference over time. Rich Dad advised, "No one expects you to own a big company right away. Start small. You can invest a little in stocks, buy a small piece of land, or start a side business alongside your main job." The point isn't the size at the beginning, it's the habit. If you keep building and nurturing your asset column, over time it will grow big enough to free you from your daily job. This lesson shows that wealth doesn't appear overnight. It comes from a series of small but smart decisions, repeated consistently over the years. At the end of the chapter, Rich Dad reminded, "Your day job only covers your current expenses, but your true business is building and expanding your asset column." Don't be fooled by salary, job titles, or the appearance of wealth. The truly rich are those whose assets generate income even when they're not working. And that is the third lesson. Focus on building your own business, your personal asset column. Now that you understand the importance of building assets, we move on to Chapter 4, where Rich Dad reveals another secret: the power of taxes and corporations, and how they help the rich get richer.
Chapter 4: The History of Taxes and the Power of Corporations. In the previous chapters, we talked about assets, liabilities, and the importance of building your own business. But there's another factor, just as important, that has widened the gap between the rich and the poor. That factor is taxes and the power of corporations. At school, we're taught that taxes exist to share the burden, that the rich contribute more to society. But Rich Dad taught Robert a completely different truth. It's actually the poor and middle class who pay the most in taxes. Meanwhile, the rich know how to use corporations and the law to protect their wealth. Rich Dad explained, taxes were first introduced with the promise of taxing the rich to help the poor. But over time, the burden shifted to the middle class, the employees. Why is that? Because the rich have companies, assets, and legal ways to minimize taxes. The poor have little to tax. And so the middle class, those earning steady wages, end up carrying the heaviest tax load. Robert realized the contrast between his two dads. Poor Dad, a government employee, worked hard but always had taxes taken directly from his paycheck. Rich Dad, on the other hand, used his businesses to control cash flow and was rarely taxed the same way. Rich Dad explained, a company isn't just a place of business, it's also a legal financial shield. Employees work, earn, and pay taxes first, then spend what's left. The rich build corporations, spend and invest first, and then pay taxes only on what's remaining. For example, if a business owner earns $100,000, they can first deduct expenses like cars, travel, meals, or staff salaries, and then pay taxes on what's left. But if an employee earns the same $100,000, taxes are taken off the top, and they only get to spend what's left. This difference creates a massive gap. Rich Dad emphasized, the game was never fair, but if you're willing to learn, you can make the rules work for you. Poor Dad was the perfect example of lacking financial knowledge. He believed in security, that if he studied hard and worked hard, the government would take care of him. In reality, his income was slowly eaten away by taxes. Rich Dad, on the other hand, stressed that the rich aren't necessarily smarter. They just take the time to learn about money and the law. That knowledge gives them the edge schools will never provide. And once again, the lesson was clear. The difference isn't how much you earn, but how much you keep and how well you make it grow. And at the end of the chapter, Rich Dad reminded, Never think the game is fair. It never was. But if you're willing to learn, you can turn the game into your advantage. Robert understood. Relying on a high-paying job means you'll always be a victim of taxes and expenses. Only by learning to build assets, create companies, and apply financial knowledge can you truly step into the world of the rich. And this was the fourth lesson. The rich understand the power of corporations and taxes. They don't just work hard to earn money, they learn how to protect it and multiply it.
Chapter 5. The Rich Invent Money. In the earlier chapters, Rich Dad taught Robert the difference between assets and liabilities, and the power of corporations and tax laws. But those were only the foundations. Now, Rich Dad posed a bigger question. What will you do when you face financial challenges? When you have no money, how will you respond? For the poor and middle class, the common answers are, I can't afford this, or I don't have enough. But the rich ask a very different question. How can I afford it? That's the creative mindset the rich use to invent money. Rich Dad explained, when you say, I can't afford it, your brain shuts down. But when you ask, how can I afford it, your brain starts working, searching for solutions. The poor often close their minds with statements. The rich open their minds with questions, turning problems into opportunities for creativity. Robert realized this simple habit of asking the right questions is what allowed Rich Dad to constantly find new ways to invest, build businesses, and create streams of income. Rich Dad shared, the poor often think opportunities are only for the lucky. But the truth is, opportunities are always around us. Not everyone sees them. The rich train themselves to seek and recognize opportunities. When markets crash, the poor panic and sell off their assets. The rich see it as a chance to buy at bargain prices. Robert remembered Rich Dad saying, every time the economy shifts, some people lose and others get rich. The difference isn't the economy. It's how people see it and how they respond. Rich Dad emphasized that inventing money requires more than knowledge. It requires courage. He said, the poor and middle class are often held back by fear. They fear failure, they fear losing money, so they never try. The rich treat failure as a lesson. Every setback teaches them something new, and next time they do better. That is the big difference. While the poor avoid risk, the rich learn how to manage risk, and by doing so, they gain the courage to innovate and turn ideas into real money. Rich Dad often advised Robert, if you want to invent money, keep learning and keep taking action. Knowledge gives you confidence, but action creates results. He encouraged Robert to read books, attend classes, meet successful people, but above all, to experiment. Because only through action do you learn the real lessons. The rich don't wait for opportunities to come. They create opportunities through constant learning, trying, and doing. At the end of this lesson, Rich Dad said, money isn't limited. It's like ideas. The more creative you are, the more you learn, the more ways you'll find to create it. The rich don't work hard just to earn money. They work hard to seek opportunities, to learn, and from there, they invent money. Robert realized this mindset was what set Rich Dad apart. He never allowed himself to be limited by circumstances. Instead, he always asked, how can I turn this situation into an opportunity? And that is the fifth lesson. The rich invent money. They don't sit and wait for luck. They turn creativity and courage into concrete action. Chapter 6. Work to learn, don't work for money. By this point, Robert had learned that the rich know how to invent money and how to use corporations and the law to protect it. But Rich Dad kept reminding him of something even more important. Don't work just for money. Work to learn. Rich Dad said, money is temporary. Skills are the real assets. If you have skills, you can create money anywhere,
under any circumstances. Robert's poor dad was the perfect example of the trap many people fall into. He was an excellent teacher, highly educated, with advanced degrees and strong expertise, but he only knew one field. That left him completely dependent on his government job. Rich Dad taught specializing too early can make you good at one thing but weak at managing your financial life. The rich are different. They learn broadly. They understand business, sales, investing, and people management. That diversity of skills is what gives them freedom. Employees usually focus only on their specialty. The rich focus on learning how to run the entire system. Rich Dad insisted, if you can't sell, it will be very hard for you to become rich. Every business depends on the ability to sell a product or service. Robert was once very shy about selling, but Rich Dad made him learn. He advised, take a sales job even if the pay is low. Sales and communication skills will help you persuade, connect, and open doors to countless opportunities in the future. Rich Dad emphasized that the poor and middle class usually work for a paycheck. The rich choose jobs based on the skills they can gain, not the money they receive right away. Robert remembered Rich Dad's words, "The poor work for security. The rich work for freedom." Many people settle for a stable job and a steady paycheck because it gives them a sense of safety. But that very sense of safety keeps them trapped, never escaping the endless cycle of money worries. Rich Dad taught Robert, if you want to be rich, don't be afraid of change. Try new jobs, learn new skills, and see every experience as an investment in yourself. Throughout his youth, Robert took on many different jobs: sales, marketing, aviation, even the military. None of these were for making lots of money. They were to gain skills, leadership, communication, teamwork, and investment. It was this wide range of experiences that gave Robert a solid foundation when he later started businesses and investments. He understood that money comes and goes, but skills last forever. Rich Dad concluded, money isn't limited. It's like ideas. The more creative you are, the more you learn, the more ways you'll find to create it. The rich don't work hard just to earn money. They work hard to seek opportunities, to learn, and from there, they invent money. Robert realized this mindset was what set Rich Dad apart. He never allowed himself to be limited by circumstances. Instead, he always asked, how can I turn this situation into an opportunity? And that is the sixth lesson. The rich work to learn, not just for money. Build skills, knowledge, and experience. That's the true foundation for lasting financial freedom. And so, the key lessons from Rich Dad became clear. Understanding assets and liabilities, knowing the power of corporations, inventing money, and learning skills instead of just chasing paychecks.
Chapter 7. Overcoming Obstacles. You've learned about assets and liabilities, how to create money, and how to work to build skills. But Robert admits a hard truth. Most people know what they should do, yet they never become rich. Why is that? Because between knowledge and action, there are always invisible barriers. In this chapter, Robert reveals the 5 biggest obstacles that anyone must overcome in order to become wealthy. The first and greatest obstacle is the fear of losing money. Robert said, everyone is afraid of losing. The rich are afraid too, but the difference is they don't let fear control them. Rich Dad taught that failure is part of the process of success. The rich don't avoid failure, they learn from it. Meanwhile, the poor often let fear stop them from even getting started. Rich Dad once said a memorable line, "Winners are not afraid of losing. Losers are. Failure is part of the game." The second obstacle is doubt. People often ask themselves, what if I fail? What if the market crashes? What if people laugh at me? Doubt causes many to miss opportunities. The rich also consider risks, but instead of letting doubt paralyze them, they act to find the answers. Robert realized, whenever an investment opportunity appears, the poor hesitate and stand still. The rich study, analyze, and then try. That difference determines who moves forward and who stays behind. Surprisingly, laziness is another silent enemy of financial success. Rich Dad didn't define laziness as lying on the couch all day. He said, laziness is when you keep yourself busy to avoid what really matters. For example, many people say, "I'm too busy. I don't have time to learn about investing." They don't realize that being busy is often just an excuse to avoid facing their financial problems. The rich are different. They make time for what truly matters: learning, seeking opportunities, managing money, instead of being consumed by endless small tasks. Rich Dad stressed, habits shape your financial future. Many people have the habit of paying others first, paying bills, paying debts, spending money, and only then thinking about saving or investing. As a result, they never have anything left to build assets. The rich do the opposite. They pay themselves first. The moment they receive income, they immediately set aside a portion to invest in assets. Only then do they use what remains for expenses. This habit allows them to grow their wealth steadily instead of constantly chasing bills. The final obstacle is arrogance. Rich Dad said, "When you're arrogant, you stop listening. And when you stop listening, you start learning. That's when you start losing." Many people believe they already know enough, or their pride keeps them from admitting mistakes. That ego blocks them from learning from others. The rich, however, stay humble enough to keep learning. They aren't afraid to admit when they're wrong, and they aren't afraid to ask for guidance. That humility helps them grow and progress much faster. Chapter 8: Starting Your Journey. You've heard the 7 lessons from Rich Dad: understanding assets and liabilities, building financial literacy, learning how to create money, working to learn, and overcoming mental barriers. But all of this is just theory unless you take action. In this chapter, Robert shares specific steps that anyone, whether you're a student, an employee, or a business owner, can take to begin the journey toward financial freedom. He calls them 10 steps to getting rich. Step 1. Decide why you really want to be rich. Robert emphasizes, if your motivation isn't strong enough, you'll quit at the first sign of difficulty. Rich Dad used to say, money alone won't drive you. You need a reason bigger than money. Some people want wealth to take care of their families. Others want freedom from the grind of a job. Some simply want the liberty to live life on their own terms. Write down your reason. It will be the fire that carries you through every challenge. Step 2. Make conscious choices. Every day, you have the power to choose, to learn or not learn, to spend or invest, to let money control you or to control money. The poor often say, "I don't have a choice." But the truth is, you always do. You just may not see it. Robert advises, whenever you face a financial decision, ask yourself, does this choice bring me closer to financial freedom or further away from it? Step 3. Choose your friends carefully. Rich Dad once said, if you want to soar like an eagle, don't hang around chickens. Your environment and the people around you shape your financial mindset. If your circle is filled with people who fear risk and crave only safety, it's hard to step forward boldly. But when you surround yourself with successful people, you naturally absorb how they think, how they spot opportunities, and how they overcome challenges. Step 4. Master one financial formula
then learn a new one. Robert explains that the poor often cling to a single formula: go to school, get a job, earn a paycheck. But the world changes, and that formula no longer guarantees success. The rich are always seeking new formulas. They learn to invest in real estate, stocks, businesses, or systems. Rich Dad advised Robert, whenever you see a new opportunity, don't rush to say, "I don't know." Instead, ask yourself, how can I learn? Step 5, develop self-discipline. Robert says, winners are not always the smartest, but they are always the most disciplined. You may know how to invest, but if you can't control fear or greed, you'll lose. You may earn a high income, but without discipline to save and invest, you'll end up with nothing. Rich Dad always reminded him, personal discipline is more important than financial knowledge. Robert continues with more action steps. Step 6. Pay well for good advisors. Don't be cheap when it comes to expert guidance, because the right advice can make you far more money in return. Step 7. Give and you shall receive. The rich believe in sharing both knowledge and wealth. Step 8. Focus. Once you choose a direction, pour yourself into becoming the best in that field. Step 9. Learn how to use debt and taxes. The poor fear debt. The rich use it to grow. The poor complain about taxes. The rich learn how to manage them strategically. Step 10. Take action now. Knowledge is only potential power. Action is what turns it into results. Robert concludes, wealth doesn't come from luck. It comes from preparation, discipline, and action. Anyone can begin as long as they decide to take the first step today. Rich Dad often said, remember, you don't have to be perfect to start, but you do have to start to become perfect. And that is the final lesson. Begin your journey. At this point, the core principles of Rich Dad, Poor Dad have been shared. The only question left is, are you ready to take action to change your financial life? My dear friend, we've just completed the journey through Rich Dad, Poor Dad, a book that has transformed the financial mindset of millions around the world. From Rich Dad's lessons, you've seen that the difference isn't in how much money you make, but how you think about money, how you use it, and how you turn it into a tool for freedom. Remember, the path to financial freedom isn't a giant leap, but a series of small, consistent steps taken every day. And most importantly, it begins today. If you found this audiobook helpful, please hit like and follow this channel so you won't miss the next books, timeless classics that will continue to expand your financial mindset, change the way you see money, and bring you closer to true wealth and freedom. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next audiobook.